the Weapons Collective Edge.
Welcome back to the Weapons Collective Edge. Today is going to be part 2 of the Langmuir Systems for the plasma cutter table, and we're going to install the drive shafts and the stepper motors and get all that stuff in there, so we'll get some CNC version of the plasma cutter built. And then in part 3 we'll finish up the computer system, loading the program and getting it to burn. So we'll see you in a minute. We're going to continue on. We're going to bolt down the water table. Uses a 5/16 headed socket head to a self-tapping. So I took a center punch and center punched where my hole is going, just so it won't slide around. Put down some pressure, pops through, blow out any of the little bits underneath it, and then seat it down until the rubber expands just a little bit. Just keep doing that. There's 8 total screws. C-clamp it down before you get it. Just kind of feel the edge till you get it exactly on both sides how you'd like it, and then put the 8 screws in, just like that. So I'm aligning this so that this is running parallel with this. So what I've done is, Langmuir said to, let's get a closer look here for you guys. Langmuir said to set this at this chamfer height, right even, right through there. And then on this side, there's 4 bolts, 2 here and 2 down underneath on both sides, making it 8 bolts. Loosen all those and then just slightly snug them back up. And then this should be able to pivot a little bit. I'll show you. You see here, I loosen this up. That can now pivot. So I'm going to adjust that up to this height and then slide this across and see if its thickness is even with this side and even with this side. Now I'm tightening these bolts back up. After I've pushed down on the one end, my far end was high, so I lowered it. Tighten all 4 of these on top and tighten the lower ones after we get everything leveled and perfect. So for right now, just need the top 4. So come in here and we'll check the shim. Put an 1/8 inch shim under here. Get that underneath. Check it. Run it to the middle. Check it. And then we'll come over here and run it to this end. And check it. And it looks like I'm good. Clear all the way. So that should be about level. And then I will finish tightening up the 4 bolts, and this will be done with the leveling the gantry. So now we're going to install the lead nut right here. I'll show you what that looks like. So it's a plastic piece. It's got a spring on it right here, and it bolts on with 4 bolts. And we slide it through here in this bracket, and I'll put this first screw in here. You get a washer on one side, 832 screw, and fish it through there, and a washer on the other side, and a nylock washer, or not nylock washer, but a nylock nut, and so that will lock them on there. I'll show you a close-up of that. That's what we've got. It's got 4 bolts, 4 washers, and this L shape that goes towards the end of the machine here is the white side, or the spring side is on that side. Just like that. I'm going to tighten these up just to where this thing's still loose, because it wants to be loose when you load the lead screw. We'll mount the X-axis lead screw nut. Use our 832 screws through here with a washer. Put that on there, another washer and a nut. Just like the other end, this is just on the sliding side. We'll mount all those up, all 4 of those. And then we'll put our lead screw through here. Right in there. Put our bearing in here. We'll put our bearing right in the end here with 2 screws to mount that in. We'll get that all lined up and then we'll move on from there. So on this bearing mount, your bearing here presses into your bearing mount block, and then it's going to attach. I want to see here. When you attach it, you got to put your screws up and through here. So if you see these 4 bolts that were here, I have to take 1 bolt out so that you can get your fingers in here and load these screws. I didn't put you through the pain of seeing me wiggle my fingers back and forth and try to hold onto that screw, but you fit it through there and get it onto your block, and then you tighten those up through these holes that are in the back side. Once you get that all tight, then you can put your screw back in. And then there's 2 screws right here that keep that and retain that bearing in there. So I've got the lead screw in here. You want to push this white piece back on the spring while you're threading that through. If it's engaged tight, it can break this piece. You want to make sure it's nice and loose when we're doing this. And then the next part, once we get that threaded in there, we're going to attach the brackets for the lead screw to attach to, a bearing block down here on this one, and then the motor mount on this end. Tighten these up. Retains that bearing. Snug those up like that. And tighten these screws in here. You can see that right here. Get in there. Screw that down. There we are, nice and tight. Good to go. So we slide the lead screw up in through the bearing, and then in the end of that it gets a washer and a bolt with a little bit of Loctite on it. If you can see that little bit of yellow on there, that goes in the end right through here, and then tighten that up, and that will lock it onto the lead screw there. With the right size hex wrench there. Onto that tight. And that'll lock it in place just like that. Do that on both sides. That was the X, we'll do the Y, and that'll be it. Here we're going to mount the Y motor mount right here. Again, this is where you have to take one of the screws out from your main plate so you can access inside here and fish these screws inside to bolt it down. So get in there, tighten up those screws. And that puts in your Y motor mount plate right here. And after that, we'll put our stepper motors on and mount our coupler on here. You see the coupler that we're going to mount. And that goes right on the end of this. Right there. So we'll have that next. So we mount the Y-axis step motor, and we've got this coupler here, which we can see here goes on the end of our lead screw. So you slide that onto there, and then get it seated all the way onto the lead screw. Tighten that up, and then make sure it slides on your motor and tighten that up. I've got one screw holding the motor on right now, just so that I can get this all lined up. And then when I get it all secured and everything is attached to each other, then I'm going to come in and I'm going to put my screws into my motor. So my Y motor has got 1024 screws, and the cable hangs down. You have to make sure the cable hangs down. The Y motor is also longer than the X motor. You can see the difference here. It's about, I'd say, an inch, inch and a half longer. So that's your Y motor. You put the 4 screws in there, and then we've got our lead screw completely attached. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll do the exact same thing, same setup on the X, and then we'll be all set with the lead screws and the motors. There's the whole table fully assembled. We've got our X motor with our cable that's going to be mounted to the electronics. Our Y motor, which is going to be mounted. Going to mount our electronics right here. That'll be our next step. And right now this doesn't move unless you turn your lead screws. So if you turn your lead screws, it moves. Got your cable mount up here. And your handle comes down in here for your plasma cutter handle, and that will be wired also to the electronics. So overall, there's your little tools that's up in front. So that's the overall full assembly, except for the electronics and wiring everything to the plasma cutter, which that'll all be next. Well, that's the end of part 2. So we got in all our parts that we needed to with the drive shafts and stepper motors. We got all the Z-axis mounted on. Everything's good on there. So next we'll finish up the computer and get a program loaded and show you how it works. So see you on part 3.